So good afternoon, handy listeners such as you are, and welcome back to this, our third in the little explorations of the new third wave of captains from Steamforged. I'm joined once again by Jamie and Sherwin. Hello, gentlemen.
Hello, indeed.
All right.
Veteran...
We are the most enthusiastic group of people.
Jamie, I'll start with you on this one. Veteran Captain Greede, I've been very much looking forward to this discussion. Where did this idea come from? Let's start there.
It's a good question. An amalgamation of different things, I guess.
This has the look of Matt Hart about it.
It actually, not as much as you think, to be honest. I think that the genesis for everyone wanting to know what happened to Greede, obviously, is that at this point quite a famous bit of story that Sherwin put out.
I'll be completely honest. I have very purposefully left that discussion to last because that's the thing I'm very much looking forward to having. So, like the headline event. But before we get there, of course, we need to talk about what he actually does on the pitch. What were sort of the design principles behind VCG, and where has this idea sort of sprung from?
The thing is, we've had so many conversations about Veteran Captain Greede. It's been going on for quite a while because we debuted the render, or the older render, at least for Veteran Captain Greede, during the Free Cities draft. I think it was a SteamCon US over a year ago.
Yeah.
And so a lot of conversations happened before, quite a bit before then. So it was just a question of, we just thought, who is technically at this point left? Who is left after utterly decimated?
Who hasn't Sherwin killed?
Right, and we were left effectively with Greede and Strongbox, and we thought, all right, fine. Well, there's quite clearly we can quite clearly do a mounted model there. Let's go Greede on Strongbox so we can get to feature both of them. That was an idea that we sort of laughed a little bit for a while about, and then once we stopped laughing, went, yeah, all right, let's do it. And then,
what would that look like? Yeah.
There were several conversations about what weapon Greede was going to have, because I got it in my head that I wanted him to have a lance.
Yeah.
Because I always try and think, what weapons have we not got in the game already? We don't have a lance because we have only one other mounted model in the game who does not have a lance.
Okay, yeah, she has a hammer.
I remember having a conversation with Russ, who was really not super enthusiastic at first about sculpting a lance. Does it have to be a lance? Russ, I want a lance.
It was almost an umbrella.
Yeah, it was. It was almost an umbrella. Yeah.
Nice penguin reference.
Yeah, there's, but to be honest, it was just an idea that was very much born out of the love and enthusiasm of a number of different people in development and design teams, and we kind of got to where we are really. There's obviously a number of things that I've kind of got to skirt over because you say you want to do the discussion with Sherwin towards the end of the story, but it kind of came from the things that made us what ideas made us happiest, and there's those kind of the ideas that we want.
Oh, it's nicely wholesome. Is coming to his statistics then, was there almost like what would the average of Greede and Strongbox's stats be at any point, or is it just sort of like, right, what does he look like sort of pushed together?
Yeah, kind of that. Like we started off with the basis of combining the two together. We quite a number of these stats changed quite a bit in development because we were trying to push the boundaries as much as possible and then sort of try and rein them in a little bit once we've done that. That's where you get that utterly ludicrous influence stat from, for instance, is the fact that these are two models combined into one. And there are a number of different things that link together. Obviously, the trusty steed is a quite foundational element of how this model works, which we'll probably start off with, and the fact that Captain Greede and Strongbox are both representing your captain and mascot slots. So yes. A team with Veteran Greede at its head will only ever have 5 models on the pitch, because obviously you can't have Avarice and Greede because you can't duplicate the same character. So you have 5 models on the pitch at a time. So that sort of gives you the basis for a lot of the things that you want to do. That's where a lot of things like where the extra activation rule comes from. That's where the influence stat comes from. And that kind of gives you the basis for different things. You sprinkle that in with, as you say, combining some of the elements of the original characters, such as the speed stats, etc. And then you kind of start to get a framework for which to build this model upon. And then we start thinking about, okay, what other unique elements playstyle wise do we want to push into this model? And that's a very, very rough idea of how this model came together, I guess.
Yeah, I love the idea that both Strongbox and Greede are faster combined than they are individually. They named their jog is now higher than it was separately. On Trusty Steed, whilst that makes a degree of sense, immediately sort of leaping off the page in terms of roster selection for the team, how is that intended to work for roster selection for tournaments? Does VCG take up a captain and a mascot slot in your roster as well as on the pitch?
No, so this is nothing to do with your roster size at all. So this is literally just the models that you're selecting on the pitch to play with. So veteran captain Greede will only take one slot of your 12. What's kind of comical about this is there seems to be a growing trend among some people to want to only take 6 models out of 12 to roster to a tournament, which is quite sort of comical and cute.
The Pete Williamson effect.
Sorry, I've heard. It isn't actually one of the things that they might be looking to do is go, I only have to take 5 models to a tournament now. You do technically have to take a 6th. So if you want to really, really troll people, we were talking about sort of the most comical roster you could take to a tournament, which would be your veteran captain Greede, your 4 squaddies that you want to play, and then literally just take models that are illegal to play. So you just take veteran captain Greede, your 4 squaddies, then take Strongbox and Avarice and Greede and Coin, and you literally can't play any of those models.
They can be in your roster, but they can't be on the pitch. Lovely. Oh, I love that. Looking at his stats, he's gotten better across the board when he's mounted, which makes a degree of sense. He's fast, like I said. He's got a better kick stat. His tack has gone up from 4 to 5, if I remember rightly. You see the ridiculous influence stat of 6/6. I'll be honest, that's the thing that makes the most amount of sense to me. In the he is 2 models. So if you think most captains are 4/6, if he's the mascot as well, he'd need to go to 5/6. But then there needs to be a thing that's uniquely his. So having an extra point of influence in a guild, which is traditionally seen as having an inefficiency of influence, or whilst that influence can be effective wherever you put it, they are not the most efficient spenders of influence. So weirdly, the influence stat makes the most amount of sense to me. I did wonder if he'd keep Tough Hide, just because Strongbox has it. The low knockdown makes perfect sense because he's on a giant tortoise. And I really like the playbook in that it looks innocuous at first, but when you combine it with that the lance rule on his back, that he suddenly goes to tack 11 with a momentous 3-on-3. I think it's hilarious. I mean, just the visual.
It's actually 12 because of shelling out as well.
Oh, of course. Yeah, like that's a great first activation that not a lot of people will see coming.
For sure. I mean, you do have to be very careful when you commit Greede to a fight if you're going to, because the majority of Greede's abilities certainly are more supportive. But the fact that Greede can, in a pinch, kick out quite a reasonable amount of damage, I think it's something that's, say, if you are throwing some of your squaddies in and the scrum is just starting to go against you, and then you can throw in Greede to try to throw it back in your favour, that would be quite a good use of him. Probably not the person you want to throw in first, because again, as you say, he hasn't carried over the Tough Hide. 20 health boxes is not a small amount of health. But he's certainly not gonna be a frontline captain as much as someone like, say, Tapper would be, or Hammer.
No, that makes sense. And again, although he isn't a coach, he does seem more about the character plays than necessarily his playbook. In that, his forward minions, this 6-inch pulse of +2/+2 move gives some absolutely terrifying threat ranges to the guild. Minx and Rage especially spring to mind, and then Persuasion with a non-once per turn, although can only affect each model once per turn. Target other model suffers a 2-inch push. Now, that could be friendly or enemy, presumably, and the wording on Persuasion, I'm not sure, but I just wanted to check with you. Does this still require a hit roll against enemy models?
Yes, it will, because it's target.
It's target, not choose. There we go, perfect.
There you go, yeah. So if you roll against the friendly model, it doesn't roll, because you don't roll against friendly models, or you can hit. But yeah, because it says target against an enemy model, then yeah, you'd have to roll.
But all the same, we've seen consistently across both with Soma and Festival, if there is a theme running between these 3 captains, it's going to be that ability to reposition models in the form of in Greed's case in Persuasion, is I always had in my mind this idea of Greed calling the shots, and I quite like that both of these character plays really, really sort of encapsulate that. For
sure. It's very much the little guy with the big mouth, giving orders to other people and other people then obeying what's going on there. And him, a captain, sort of that's a very logical conclusion to the kind of personality that we see Greede as being, or that we believe him to be. So yeah, it's great that that's coming across.
And then I suppose the big thing on the back of his card of do the thing. Now this isn't superior strategy, which I know because this trait was spoiled at Nova. Am I thinking?
No, I think so. I think we've talked about it conversationally before. I can't remember exactly when.
Yeah, I know that that Soma and Festival's character plays were revealed at Nova. I can't remember when but I know this isn't a surprise. And I know a lot of people immediately compared it to superior strategy, which makes a degree of sense because, of course, you gain an additional activation. Unlike superior strategy, you are only ever going to have 6 activations in a turn, unlike the potential 7 activations of superior strategy. So in many ways, this makes up for... It's part of, I imagine, the combination of captain and mascot in one model.
Yes, it's kind of a necessity. It also, therefore, sort of dual purpose becomes his global passive.
Yes.
It's kind of ticking a number of boxes with one stone, really, which is wow, that was a terrible analogy. But ticking boxes, that's going to haunt me for a while.
Yep.
But yeah, so it's sort of started out as a necessity, and then it became something that when we're adding a rule to, I think this is an analogy that I'm good at. It's actually quite old at this point. When we're adding a rule to a model, we don't want it to just be making up for a weakness. We want it to be if a model has an inbuilt weakness and they have an ability that is designed to help them overcome that weakness, we don't want them to just bring it back to par because it's a zero sum at that point. Then why have the weakness in the first place? They either need to have that weakness as an outstanding factor to them, and then we are building in other elements of them to have that weakness be acceptable, or you're providing them with a rule to take them a little bit above and beyond, to make them a bit more powerful. Actually, you've turned a perceived weakness into a strength of the model, and that's what Do the Thing is attempting to do. Is it's not worded like the other global passives where Greed has to be on the pitch at the same time for its use. You could take Greed out and they still Do the Thing. You literally get it.
Yeah, that was the big thing I wanted to sort of double check in terms of a rules clarification thing. Is it doesn't say, unlike all the other global rules, whilst this model is on the pitch.
Yeah.
So that feels quite massive, that the fact that even if Greed 2 gets taken out, you're still going to have that second activation on a friendly model where you want it.
Absolutely. And the fact that it's not a declared thing either, that's one of the things.
So you could literally have it, you could activate your other 4 models and then at the end go, right, X is having another go.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, one of the things there's a very interesting way in which you can use this ability, particularly on the first turn before the teams have engaged properly. Like you could look to do something quite similar to superior strategy and make it quite obvious your final turn is going to be. Alternatively, what you could do if you really wanted to, you could just jog all 5 of your models forwards without spending any influence at all and just going, who's it going to be? Surprise.
Which certainly turn 1 isn't a great waste of influence. The amount of times I can think I've seen and also have done myself, just exactly that, just move forward and then bin the influence because it's obvious that you're not going to be able to do the thing that you put the influence on there speculatively for.
Yeah, absolutely. And it just gives you so many options to play that first turn just so differently. And I think that's one of the most interesting things about it. And then also, just as I say, it's making up for that weakness and that you get that 6 activation, but it's giving you so many options that weren't there otherwise. So it really is. It's to me, at least in theory, it sounds like it's performing its job of it's covering a weakness of the model and turning it on its head.
But going a little sideways, yeah. I mean, I must admit, the first time I saw it, when sort of these were previewed to us in the media community, my first response was to immediately race to the Union cards and see which heroic plays I could abuse by having twice. To which the answer is, of course, none. There aren't any, apart from Fangtooth, and he's not going to be able to do. He's not going to gain a benefit from it a second time. I find the interaction with Hemlock and Rage really interesting.
Yeah, with getting double dipping on Furious and with Magical Brew, it could be pretty good as well. I actually think the other one that's inbuilt on Greed's card that's quite good is that you can double dip on forward minions, because you can turn that +2/+2 move. You can use it twice, so you could use Greed, forward minions. You could use another model, take an 8-inch jog if they had a 6-inch jog normally, and then activate them again, and then do it again with do the thing later in the turn.
I see what you mean. So for a moment I thought you were saying, I was looking at, I'm pretty sure forward minions is once per turn, but I see what you mean. You're dipping in that jog twice. So if I'd say got Minx with a 7-inch jog, if I remember rightly, so all of a sudden she goes from a 7-inch jog to a 9-inch jog, which is in fact 18 inches of jog. That seems all right.
Yeah, it seems okay.
That seems pretty good, I have to say. Greed is... I mean, the big thing here is he's hilarious. There's no way this model isn't hilarious, or just the concept isn't hilarious. But then what I also quite like is we just sort of, between the two of us, you come up with things that the team couldn't do before. So although it's not a comedy model, it's not a comedy character, it is intrinsically hilarious. I don't think there's any two ways about that. It's a little tiny man sat atop a tortoise. That's not easy to say, but still has a very viable impact in the game. I also think he's going to have a huge impact on the kicking aspect of the Union game, which I think is an area where perhaps previously they've always they've preferred to receive. I think it's fair to say.
For sure, they've definitely struggled with the kicking game, and yes, that is perhaps the one element of Veteran Greed that is absolutely, well, not that it's the one area that's intended, but that was one area that we absolutely intended to hit with Greed, I suppose. Because they have always had that weakness of they've not got many models that are great to kick with. Well, with Veteran Greed, you can kind of kick with anybody, because not only have you've got an advantage of that they've got an advanced position, you've got an advantage of they've got an advanced position, you have a speed buff following forward minions, and the kicking model can activate twice. You can exert a lot of power on the first turn now if you need.
It's also a case of both Blackheart and Rage in their captain roles wanted to have the ball for that mobility that the ball gives you. The ball is an incredibly useful resource. I know through the conversation that I had with Jason Mountain and the State of the Union address that we did earlier on in the year, the ball is such a precious resource that you never ever want to give it up. I think what Greed does very well is provide that same mobility that was garnered from having the ball, albeit in a different way, but means that you no longer have to play that I'm going to have the ball and you can't have it because I need this to be able to play you.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, it's what I think it's taken us. I'm going to talk a little bit about wider Guild Ball sort of development strategy, design strategy, over sort of the last year or so, which is that Season 4 has undoubtedly been a power up of the game, and one of the things that we are combating, in some cases more slowly, in some cases more quickly. The game plans are another part of this is that we are combating that standoff should not be an important. Not that it's not important, but it shouldn't be a primary method of playing the game. It shouldn't be a default setting. And there are times in Guild Ball history where it has been. That's why we're giving more and more tools to perhaps make that not a thing. And what's part of the reason behind giving out so many sort of mobility speed buffs as well in these three captains is that if you think about how the game works for a moment, and that obviously the majority of the time one model at a time is going to be moving or activating, doing things because of alternating activations, and there is an inherent problem there because you can't throw a whole team at once. Obviously we've got Festival throwing a whole team at once to attack that problem in a very literal way. But speed buffs themselves can be used if there are enough of them around, so that people kind of don't really have the opportunity to move. If they don't have the opportunity to move the whole team, perhaps if they can move one model so far that they can interact with the opposing players, the opposing team, and that's a way of combating it, that you can reach out and touch and start that engagement, to actually have people playing the game properly together.
Nice.
I don't think it's playing that point particularly well. But
no, I know what you mean. So the more and more is coming in to be able to, Guild Ball hasn't been solved by any stretch of the imagination, but it certainly has reached a point where everyone is at least agreeing on the equation that we are going to play in this kind of way. And with both these plot cards and these new captains, Festival, especially after our conversation on her, are really going to do what they can to change the variables in that equation so that we have to rethink the status quo. Nice.
I've I've actually got a better analogy. So we could probably move on to Sherwin in a second. We've got a better analogy for what I'm trying to enunciate, which is, say if you have two teams that are, I don't know, just over 12 inches apart. And let's take example of the game plan, which is probably a better example of this, actually, where there's one of the cards that you can move 3 of your players and give them all 2-inch dodge. If you say, I'm going to threat extend 3 of my players and move them all 2 inches forwards, and the opposing player goes, that's fine, I'm going to do the reverse of that and go 2 inches backwards with 3 players. And most people focus on the models that have moved, when the important part of that equation are the models that haven't moved, have all become closer together because one got closer. Even though some have moved further away, the models that haven't moved at all have gained proximity. Does that make some sense? There's more.
Yes, it does.
Yeah. So that becomes a more important part of the equation. Is the model? It's not just the models that moved; it's the models that haven't moved and the models that have moved.
Interesting. Sherwin, I can barely contain this any longer. Last we saw Avarice and Greede playing, I forget what you called it, quill stone parchment, to see whether or not Avarice beat the hell out of Greede. What happened next?
So, yeah, that is... Let's see if we can land on this. So, yeah, that's pretty much the last time we see them, and the implicit understanding is if Greede wins, then, the union of the two of them isn't being broken up, the partnership will continue. And if Avarice wins, well, he's going his own way. And that also means probable certain death for Greede, because he's made so many enemies, and the only thing that's keeping him alive is Avarice.
It's certainly implied.
So, to start with, I should probably stress that it's fairly obvious that their union is broken up between the two of them. So, therefore, that means that perhaps we were erroneous in our assumption that Greede couldn't survive on his own.
Yes.
So Greede finds himself suddenly adrift with no idea what to do or where to go, and lo and behold, lands on this new idea of, well, what went wrong with the union? Why did this thing all fall down? Why are there only 3 people left in the union, and one of them's a Taurus? And he kind of lands on this idea. Well, the problem was they were completely untrustworthy. They're a band. They're a villainous brotherhood who are brought together by desperation, by by a unified goal, but none of those goals were really anything other than transient. They're only ever things where we were here together because no one else would have us. And then he immediately understands the problem is loyalty, especially having just been abandoned by Avarice. And then comes to the conclusion, well, what do you have loyalty to? And if you're Greede, the only thing you really understand of any sort of way of loyalty is money.
Yep.
Is pure capital. So at this point, he immediately embarks on an adventure to just about every gambling den he can possibly go to. And being quite the figure for sleight of hand and various other different nefarious ways of doing things, amounts an amount of capital, and is now out there forming the New Union.
Okay.
Which isn't a band from the 80s, although it sounds like and has subsequently pronounced himself the magnate of the New Union, the leader of the New Union. And at this point, we potentially may see a whole horde of different figures from the dark who are unified over the fact that Greede is paying them. They are cutthroats, they are mercenaries, they are anything else. And he will return ahead of this in due course.
Interesting. So, of course, with the going through the list of models that we've seen in the Union in the past, they have now either moved on to pastures new or new homes, or have gone the way of all flesh. But so what we're seeing is Greede is setting up himself a new cadre of mercenaries or of thieves.
I think that's fair to say. I don't think we'd. Oh, sorry, you're cutting out a little bit there. I thought you'd.
No, not saying anything.
Okay. I think we'd say he's setting up himself a new cadre. I don't think Greede would happily go back to any of the surviving members of the new union, of the old union, especially considering that perhaps some of them may not actually be that willing to rejoin the union. You have to figure that somebody like Gutter, for example, is probably fairly happy being rehabilitated under the regime of Ox in the Butchers, or even Decimate seems to be fairly content with Tapper and having gone home at last. So those figures I don't think would ever want to return to this shadowy organisation, return back to the darkness whence they came. But there's also an assumption of that we perhaps may be making this incorrect, is that would Greed's new union actually take to the pitch as a Guild Ball team?
This is absolutely my next question. is precisely that. Although just because he's doing a new venture, that doesn't necessarily mean that they will be a Guild Ball team. That there'll be mercenaries for hire to hire out. Again, we know full well that both mechanically and within the lore of the game, that the mercenary nature of the Union, as was in seasons 1 through 3, is no longer really a thing that's needed. But there'd be sort of more there as a characters within the story rather than sort of Union 2.
I think that's fair.
Excellent. Okay. Excellent. I shan't ask what's happening with Rage because people will want me to, and therefore not doing so is funny. So, gentlemen, thank you very much.
There is this. Plus, also, I really can't give that one away. That one I really can't give away.
No, I suspected as much, Jep. Perfect. Well, gentlemen, thank you very much for taking the time to have a chat to me about these 3 new captains. I'm very much looking forward to getting my hands on them. Greede and Festival especially. I can't wait to paint. And with that, gents, thank you very much. And until next time, as ever, handy listeners, such as you are, I need a better outro.